The Electoral College is one of the things that is a big actual part of the Chapter 9, and it begins in there. And I know some of the chapter questions that y'all had for this dealt with problems with the Electoral College, but something that comes up a pretty fair amount is exactly why do we need it? Why is it that we have to have it? So let me start there, and then in the second video I'll come back and I'll address some of the intricacies, if you will, of the Electoral College. Now, the gist behind the Electoral College is this. When you go back and you look at American history, you've probably heard at different points about some fairly controversial elections. And maybe even in your lifetime, and I'm pretty sure in your lifetime you may have heard of something about the 2000 presidential election with George W. and Al Gore. Now, if you go back and you look, and you're probably saying, okay, what does this have to do with the Electoral College? Pretty straightforward kind of a thing. In the year 2000, George W. was running for president, as was Al Gore, and this was in the aftermath of Bill Clinton's 8-year term. Gore being the vice president, George W. being the Republican challenger. And really, this was one of the tightest elections in American history. To put this into context, I would venture to say that George W. had gotten roughly about 49% of the vote. Al Gore had gotten roughly 49% of the vote. But when you look back at the counts, Al Gore had gotten more popular votes. There was a sense out there that in the United States, when you are running for office, if you get more votes, you win. So Al Gore should have been president of the United States. Well, not so fast. Under the Electoral College format, George W. was the one in 2000 that got a majority of the Electoral College, 271 votes to 266, which means he became president even though more Americans as individuals voted for Al Gore. Now, you're probably saying 49 to 49, and you start getting into percentage points and decimals and maybe even hundreds or thousands of percentage points when you look at some of the individual states. The gist of it is that when you look at the 2000 election, whether Gore had won or whether W had won, 51% of the people in the United States voted against the man who would become president. So this means that when we're talking about a country that's supposed to have majority rule, a majority voted against both candidates. Note on this, W won. And everybody understands that the really controversial state, when you go back and you look at this, was Florida. W's brother was the governor of Florida. Indeed, the United States Supreme Court, with a conservative majority, ultimately upheld George W. being elected president. Having said all this, there's one state that you should always win as a presidential candidate. And that is not the state of California, the biggest one. That is not the state of Texas, the largest Republican state. But indeed, that's your own home state. And interestingly enough, had Al Gore won his own home state in the 2000 election, it wouldn't have mattered what happened in Florida. It wouldn't have mattered what happened in New Mexico. Had he won his own home state, because the voters there should know you better than any other state in the country, he would have been president. In fact, George W. won Tennessee. And indeed, had you taken those, I believe, 11 electoral votes from George W.'s column and given them to Al Gore, meaning he would have won Tennessee, he would have won the presidency, and there would have been no doubt about it. But Gore didn't win his own home state. To take this back in 1996, William Jefferson Clinton was running for re-election. He was running for his second term as president, and he was running against Bob Dole. Now, truth be told, when you go back to 1996, the country was humming along. The economy was doing well. There was no war. There was no terrorism. I mean, there was the proverbial chicken in every pot and car in every garage, so to speak. I mean, that's how good things were. Of course, there were some sex scandals for President Clinton. There had been throughout, really, his time as candidate and also as president and after he would be reelected. But in the grand scheme of things, when people have money in their pocket, typically they can overlook some things, at least in the United States. When you go back and you look, the reason that I bring this up is what percentage of the vote did Bill Clinton get? The economy was humming. No war, no issues. Well, Bill Clinton, believe it or not, only got 49% of the vote in 1996. Bob Dole, the Republican challenger who basically everybody knew was going to lose that year, only got 40% of the vote. Now, to put this into context, 51% of the American people voted against the man who was going to become president of the United States. Now, note on this. The same 51% that voted against either the W or Gore winner was really the same number that voted against Clinton in 1996. And if you want to go back even further, when Bill Clinton ran as a challenger in 1992, he ran against Bush Daddy, George W.'s father, George H.W. Bush. George Daddy Bush, or Bush Daddy if you will, in 1992 was running for re-election. He had been president for 4 years. He had actually presided over a very successful mission in the Middle East to liberate Kuwait and certainly make it free for democracy. I say that tongue in cheek. Having said all this, Bush Daddy and the economy began to struggle in the early 90s, and Clinton all of a sudden became a very, very viable challenger. Here's the kick on this. In 1992, when Bill Clinton won office, he won the presidency with 43% of the vote. Bush Daddy, the incumbent president, actually finished with right at 37%, and you had a challenger down here, a little H. Ross Perot, who actually, believe it or not, got about 20% of the vote. Had Ross Perot not run for office in 1992, odds are Bush Daddy probably would have been reelected. But note on this, 57% of the American people in 1992 voted against the man who would become president of the United States. Now note, in 2000, in 1996, in 1992, the majority of Americans voted against the man who would become president. The original question that I had brought up was, why do we need an electoral college? Well, if a majority of the people are voting against the person that's going to become the quote-unquote leader of the free world, some would argue that this person has not taken office legitimately, meaning they don't have a really strong, firm footing to be able to make decisions if the mandate that they have actually more voted against them than more voted for them. The Electoral College is a way to provide these presidents with a majority, with a viable, measurable majority. Maybe George W. only got about 5 more electoral votes than Al Gore. Maybe indeed Bill Clinton, although a majority of the American people, in fact in 92, a landslide of the American people voted against him. The fact is that he got very healthy majorities in the Electoral College, so people could say Bill Clinton was the choice by the majority of the people, as they said George W. was in 2000. I give you this because although Obama won very comfortably when he defeated John McCain, although when George W. was reelected and he defeated John Kerry, he won comfortably and he won with the majority of both the popular vote and the Electoral College. The fact is, in a number of elections in American history, the candidate that was elected president had nowhere near a majority of the popular vote. The Electoral College gave them this, and it gave them more of an electoral mandate to be able to lead.